Hi, listeners. I'm Colleen Dieter, landscape consultant and certified arborist at ATXGardens.com. Welcome to the ATX Gardens Podcast, where every other week I share simple, timely tips for what to do in your Central Texas garden right now. If you're watching on YouTube, tap like and subscribe for more gardening help. Hey there, gardening friends. Today we're talking about what to do in the first half of February, especially after the big ice storm we just had. This episode, as always, is sponsored by my landscape consulting business, ATXGardens.com. So let's jump in. Okay, on the last episode, I talked about how wacky the warm weather had been. And then since then, we had an ice storm and some extremely cold temperatures. We got down into the teens in most areas of Central Texas, which is really challenging. It's difficult for gardeners when we have extreme cold, but from my perspective as someone who has a lot of experience with this kind of cold, I feel like this particular storm was mostly good. There's going to be some plant loss for sure, and most likely succulents like agaves, prickly pears, and certain types of yuccas, the cacti. A lot of them are probably going to turn to mush and may not grow back, although typically prickly pears make it through and often grow back, but the other succulents usually don't fare so well in the cold. So they're usually the first ones to show cold damage after a freeze, a really hard freeze like this. They'll be the first ones to just look like a pile of mush once they thaw out because they're mostly water. And that's why I don't really keep succulents in my yard anymore. The only ones I keep are in pots so that I can protect them, or they're low value plants where I feel okay if they freeze, it's no big deal. I expect with how cold it got and is still going to continue to get in the next few days as of this recording, rosemary and other Mediterranean herbs that were left out in the cold are likely going to be dead and probably will not grow back. So if you've got Mediterranean herbs like rosemary, certain types of thyme, certain types of oregano, things like that, if they look dead, they're probably not going to grow back and you should remove them. Any citrus that was out in temperatures below 20 degrees are probably going to die unless you covered them. And even then, covering only gets you so many degrees, sometimes only gets you about 10 degrees at best. So, if it got down to 16 in your area, that means it was still 26 degrees under that cover, and that's cold enough to kill a citrus tree. So you'll know in April if they're going to grow back or not. If your citrus is grafted, then it will not grow back. The rootstock will grow back and you can graft onto that rootstock, but it's never going to be the same and it's not going to make the fruit that you want it to make. So if you had citrus that was on its own roots and not grafted, then it's possible that it could grow back from the ground. So you'll have to wait and see probably until late April to really know for sure if any of the citrus is going to grow back or not. We'll see how the figs did. I haven't gone out yet to really look closely at my fig trees. So we'll still have to see. It takes a while for woody plants to show their cold damage. So just relax, just wait a little while, and we'll be able to tell after things thaw out, uh, if there's dead parts on your fig trees. In the past, in the winter storm, in the ice storm that we had in 2023, and then the big winter storm that we had in 2021, we also had damage on certain native trees like Palo Verdes, Texas mountain laurels, and shumard and red oaks. And that remains to be seen from this storm. I haven't really been out to take a close look yet, but keep listening to the podcast and I'll update you as I see more damage on trees and woody plants around town. But you don't have to take any action yet. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the rest of the podcast. So, the upside of a deep freeze like that is that all of the winter maintenance on our native and well adapted plants and our fruit trees and roses will be much more straightforward now that the tops of the plants have been forced into dormancy. And that's what I'm going to talk about now for the rest of the podcast. So let's start with the woody plants. It's possible that ice may have broken some branches on your trees. And if that's the case and you're safely able to do so, you can remove broken branches from your trees by making a cut below the point where the branch is cracked, either at the next branch or where the broken branch connects to the trunk. It's still a good time for tree and shrub planting as long as they are native or well-adapted species. Wait to plant Mediterranean trees like figs or tropicals like bougainvilleas until mid-March. But all the native and well-adapted trees can be planted now. It is rose pruning time all through the month of February. If you're unsure about rose pruning, you can have me out for a consultation and I can prune roses with you and show you how to do it at your house. So make a consultation appointment with me at ATXGardens.com. I am going to do a little overview of rose pruning on the podcast today. So first, you need to understand why we prune roses. So don't just run out into the garden because I said it's time to prune your roses. You have to have a good idea of what your objective is. So why do we prune roses? We prune roses to remove dead branches that look ugly and can harbor diseases. We want to remove crossing branches that can create wounds that can't heal, that allow an entry point for diseases. We want to prune roses to allow more air and light penetration into the center of the plant because they're very prone to insects and disease infestation. So getting more airflow and light into the center of the plant helps prevent diseases and insects. When we prune roses, we're also motivating the plant to bloom more and grow more, which gives the plant more vigor and extends its life and will help it grow longer. And then we also prune roses to control their size and shape to keep them fitting in the area where you planted them and prevent them from growing into walkways or growing over other plants. Here's a quick overview of rose pruning of how to do it. This is very general to guide you. So step one is to remove dead or diseased branches completely. Step two is to remove branches that are crossing back into the center of the plant. So you want to end with plant that's shaped like a vase, basically, where all of the branches are pointing out away from the center of the plant and nothing is growing back into the middle. There are some exceptions to this rule because there's some types of roses that have tons of little tiny branches growing into the middle of the plant, and it's really hard to remove all of them. That's Martha Gonzalez is one type of rose that grows like that, and the other is the Highway 290 pink buttons. With those, you'll never be able to remove all the branches crossing back into the center of the plant. And you may have a rose that's like that, where there's just so many little branches. You may not want to remove all of them. But in general, most of the shrub roses, you'll be able to remove branches that are crossing back into the center of the plant. Then, step 3 is to remove the top 1/3 to 1/2 of the plant to reduce its height. And most of the time, we want to control the height of the plant. We don't want them to get too tall to where they start to look overgrown or the rose flowers are up really high and you can't see them. So, controlling the size of the plant by removing the top third is important. Sometimes with older shrub roses, you will want to remove whole branches from the base of the plant that are getting too big and old to help improve their vigor. And so I tend to take out branches that start to get bigger around than my index finger. I'll go ahead and cut one of those out. If there's a group of them, I'll just go ahead and do some radical pruning like that to try to motivate the plant to get some newer, younger branches coming up from the base. There's a before and after photo that's going to be available on my website of 2 rose plants, one right next to the other, and one has been pruned and one has not, so that you can see how it looks. And it's pretty severe. So that's the quick overview of rose pruning. You'll want to get some rose pruning gloves. I recommend them for protecting your arms from the thorns. And I'll have a link to those in the show notes. Okay, up next, I'm going to talk to you about fruit trees. In past episodes, you may have heard me talk about chill hours. And this cold snap that we just had at the end of January is going to be very helpful to the fruit trees that need longer chill hours in order to bloom. So the cold weather is a good thing in that way. The cold weather also makes it easier to prune all of our apples, pears, peaches, plums, nectarines, and Japanese persimmons at this time of the year. Now is the time to start pruning them. And it's really good that we had that hard cold snap because it's going to really force them all into dormancy. And that is when we want to do a lot of pruning on those trees. The fruit tree pruning is similar to rose pruning, but don't remove more than 25% of the tree in 1 year. And be sure to remove any branches that are growing up from below the graft point. So most of the apples, pears, peaches, plums, nectarines, and Japanese persimmons have been grafted. So that means the top of the tree is a different variety from the roots. And when the trees are teeny tiny, like the size of pencils, they cut the top off of a tree that produces a really strong root system. And then they take a twig from a tree that produces delicious fruit and they glue them together, or they tape them together, really. And it sounds a little scary if you've never heard of it before, but gardeners have been doing this for about 6,000 years. And it's called grafting. And it's a way to get a really strong tree with a really strong root system. And but that also produces delicious fruit on the top. So what you want to make sure is that below the graft point where those 2 different varieties have been joined together, there might be branches growing up from the roots and from the rootstock, from the lower part of the tree, and you don't want that. So if you see branches coming up from low down on the trunk or coming up from the ground, you need to remove those because they're not going to make good fruit. One tip for fruit tree pruning is just to remember that more horizontal branches on your fruit trees produce more fruit. There's many ways to prune fruit trees, and I can definitely help you with a consultation. So you can make an appointment with me if you feel intimidated or nervous about pruning your fruit trees. I can help you make an appointment at ATXGardens.com. And you'll need some good orchard loppers, and I have a link to those in the show notes. And by the way, I'm an Amazon affiliate, and I get commissions from your purchases. So if you're pruning your fruit trees and you have a fruit tree that you really love that makes delicious fruit and performs really well, you can harvest scions from it. And scions are just cuttings from the tree. They're little pieces of twigs that are about the diameter and length of a pencil. You can take those scions, store them in a zip top bag, and put a damp rag or a damp paper towel in the bag with the scions. Be sure to label them with the species name and the variety name if you know it, and the date that you harvested them. And then you can store those scions in the crisper drawer in the refrigerator. And then you can share them with other gardeners, or you can even graft them onto another tree or onto existing rootstock that you have. And you can create new trees that way. Sometimes you can plant a scion in the ground and it will grow roots. That's not typical, but sometimes that will work. The scions will keep in the refrigerator until you need to start grafting and propagating them in March. March is the time for that. And of course, I'll touch on that in future podcast episodes. And Central Texas Seed Savers is having a fruit tree scion swap in February, and there'll be more details on that at the end of the show. February is a really great time for planting all the stone fruits and palm fruits and the nut trees too. So stone fruits, of course, are peaches, plums, and apricots, nectarines, and the palm fruits are apples, pears, and quince. And the nut trees here in Texas, of course, Texas is famous for pecans, but we can also grow walnuts. Shortly after pruning, you should feed your roses and fruit trees according to your soil test results. A nice layer of wood chips around the root zone out to the drip line helps too. Acts as a cozy blanket for our little trees. Okay, and now it's time for our middle of the podcast sponsor break. Hey y'all, this is Colleen Dieter with ATXGardens.com. If you want personalized help with your landscape, book a consultation and we'll walk your yard together, answer your questions, and create a plan that feels doable. This week, I helped some customers who are new homeowners. It was the first time that they've ever owned a home and they're new gardeners. And I walked through their property with them and I identified all of their plants and I let them know which plants were great, which plants might be a problem for them. I gave them advice about how to care for their shade trees. I gave them advice about how to care for all of their good plants moving forward. and what weeds to look out for and what tools to use. So that's an example of some of the advice that I can give. Check out my website at ATXGardens.com for more information. Now let's get back to the episode. What's going on with our perennials and bulbs? Now that we've finally had a very hard freeze, it makes it a lot more obvious that it's time to cut back all of the perennials. I think February is a good time to do it. I like to have it done before March 1st because around March 1st is when some of the perennials start to grow back. And I find it a little bit challenging, a little bit harder to trim the plants when they're actively growing. It can be hard to cut around the new growth sometimes. So keep that in mind. I think it's less complicated to do it in February. But like I've said in past programs, like I've said in past podcast episodes, the dead tops of the plants can sometimes shield the new growth at the bottom from cold damage too. Just keep in mind that the new growth at the bottom is vulnerable to cold damage, and if we get a hard freeze and you've cut the tops off, it's more likely that that new growth at the base can be damaged. So you have to weigh that risk with how much time and energy you have to cut everything back later in February and early March. And you have to figure out how willing you are to replace plants if they die because you cut them back too soon. Gardeners who are very devoted to wildlife wait as long as possible to cut plants back, like even right around March 1st. They'll wait until March to start cutting back because insects and animals use the dead tops of the plants for habitat. Many caterpillars, for example, pupate in the dead hollow stems of perennials and shrubs. It definitely got cold enough with this recent cold snap to damage our cool season perennials like yarrow and spiderworts. But I just leave mine alone, and they usually grow right back when this happens, with the exception of some bulbs like Dutch irises. I think the Dutch irises probably froze and they might skip blooming this year. If they were severely damaged enough, they might not bloom this year and we might see them again next year. So we'll see what happens with those. Just gotta let them do their thing. Moving on to the vegetable garden. This is a very busy time for vegetable gardeners. So first, what you have to do is assess the damage to your vegetable garden after the severe cold that we had and decide how you're going to proceed. So you may decide to just remove all the damaged plants and get your beds ready for warm season crops in March. Or you might clear some space from those damaged plants and plant another crop of cool season greens like collards and lettuce and root crops like carrots, turnips, radishes, and beets. All of those things could be planted now. If your vegetables got damaged in the cold, they tend to not recover very well. It depends how badly they were damaged, and it depends which parts of the plants got damaged. I think that it got cold enough that anything that was damaged is probably not going to recover and that should be removed. But use your own discretion. There's definitely exceptions to that advice. Now, February is a great time for planting peas, and the window for pea planting is very short. It's just a few weeks, and that's for snow peas and sugar snap peas. I like planting peas for the shoots. I actually prefer eating the shoots and as a salad green to actually waiting for the pods to form. I don't like building trellises for them to climb on. It bothers me. So I just eat the shoots. Okay, and like I mentioned in the last episode, now's the time to plant onion sets. And the sets are little baby onions that are about the size of pencils. And you just plant those directly in the garden, and they will grow through the spring into scallions, and they'll get bigger and turn into the most delicious spring onions. And then they'll get bigger and bigger and bigger until they make the big bulbs later in June. It's also time for potato planting now. I think potatoes are one of the most fun crops to grow, and they're so delicious when they're fresh from the garden. And there's tons of different methods for growing potatoes. And there's also thousands of unusual varieties of potatoes that you can try. I recommend reading about how to grow potatoes in Howard Garrett's book, Texas Organic Vegetable Gardening. I love this book. It's a great reference from Howard Garrett and Malcolm Beck. And it shows you how to grow each different type of crop for our vegetable gardens here in Texas. And there will be a link to purchase this book in the show notes. February is also the time to plant artichokes, asparagus, blackberries, and strawberries from crowns, from bare root crowns. So some of the nurseries at this time of year will carry crowns, and the crown is sort of like part of the plant where the stems connect to the roots. Is often referred to as a crown, and you can get those bare roots. They'll be packed in sand usually, or sawdust, or paper, and you just plant those crowns out at this time of the year and you'll be all set. There's still time to plant seeds indoors for warm season vegetables that take more than 80 days to mature, like peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, and tomatillos. So for those vegetables that take longer to mature and that need like cooler weather to make fruit, peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, and tomatillos are usually the ones that we think of. It's best to start them indoors at this time of year from seed and then plant them out in mid-March to get going after the threat of freezing weather has passed. And of course, I'll touch on that in future episodes. Now, join me February 15th from 1 to 4 o'clock, which is a Sunday. So that's the day after Valentine's Day, from 1 to 4 in the afternoon at Texas Keeper Cidery for the Central Texas Seed Savers annual fruit tree scion swap. We have it every year at Texas Keeper Cidery in February sometime. This year it's February 15th from 1 to 4 at Texas Keeper. Come on out and join us. Bring some fruit tree scions with you. Anything that you have that's fruit related, you can bring. Of course, you can bring seeds to share too, but the focus of this one is the fruit tree scions. Even if you don't have fruit tree scions to share, that's okay. Just come and join us. Come check it out. Meet some gardeners and get some fruit tree scions. We almost always have more scions than people. So come on down and get some fruit tree scions and learn a little bit about grafting and talk to some fruit tree nuts. All right. So that wraps up today's episode. Check the show notes for links to everything I mentioned. And if you enjoyed my podcast, please share it with a fellow Central Texas gardener. It really helps the show to grow. I'm Colleen with ATXGardens.com. See you next time. Thanks for listening to the ATX Gardens Podcast. For show notes, tools, and to book a consultation with me, visit ATXGardens.com. Happy gardening! See you next time.